Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about passing an interview. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, would you say that the skill set required to pass an interview is the same as the one used in actual jobs? If you believe they differ or are the same, can you explain how to align or differ in terms of how it differs in real world applications and your daily responsibilities? So this is basically it's slightly impossible to answer because every interview is different. There are absolutely commonalities and overlaps and things like that, and that's the thing we're going to look at. But I hope you I've said this a few times, and I still believe so. I highly suggest that you to evaluate whether or not you have what it takes to pass an interview or do a job or something like that, look at averages. So, as you might expect, you may not get every single job you ever apply for, and this includes me, guys, as well. Like, I haven't gotten I've done tons of interview over the years, and haven't gotten even in recent time I haven't gotten every single job. But the question isn't do you get every single job or do you get every interview right? Question is, do you on average do well? Like, is there usually an interest for your profile, your CV, and so forth and so forth? Are you getting to the later stages or things like that? And if that is what's happening, then yeah, you pretty much have the skills in, well, as far you mean you can always improve things. And frankly speaking, it's really important that you understand that there's quite a lot of companies where they do interviews like they're fucking incompetent. Like, it's insane to me because I've been in interviews, guys, where like the company itself, like they take a profile like a person who's going to do a technical interview, and that person doesn't actually know how to run an interview efficiently. So you don't really have much to go on because what you're fighting for is to, as I like to say, you're fighting to get a good gut feeling from the person who's doing the interview because it's their word that is going to determine whether or not you get the job or not. That's all. There is nothing else that's going to matter whatsoever. You can be the most talented developer in the world or you can be complete shit. It doesn't matter because what's going to happen is that when you get into the interview, the evaluator is going to determine if they want you to work for them or not. And I have gotten jobs and I've gotten rejected on jobs for various reasons. And the most common thing is that either you're a bad culture fit, as a like you. To give you a very concrete example, I had an interview where they sent me a code test, where it was I think it was a back end position, and the code test was it was a full stack application and it was only for a backend position, right? And the idea was that I would focus on the backend, but since I know full stack, I thought, okay, I can do an extra leg on this thing, and I actually implemented the whole thing. So I did both the front end and the backend test and sent it in, and they were pretty happy with it. I think they had one comment, which was apart from that, it was pretty good, right? But I still didn't get the job because when I did the personal interview later, I sat in a meeting with three or four other software developers who all had very specific opinions about technology choices that didn't overlap with my own ideas and thoughts about, what are good practices and stuff like that. And I hope by now, if you've been following along with my little videos that I make, that you would know at the very least that I seem to have some idea of, like, I'm not going to say that I know everything, I absolutely don't, but I hope that you can establish that I know something about technology and software development, things like that. But they weren't convinced because the way that they wanted to run the interview put me in a position where it was kind of hard for me to answer some of their questions. I remember specifically the one I think they asked that was like the killer for me. I suspect that's the thing that made them go, no, we don't want this guy. And that was, Frederick, how would you implement searching? And I think I responded by, that's a pretty big and complicated question. What do you mean by searching? Are we, Are we talking about, searching as like if we're talking like a Google search when you're actually needing to index large pieces of text and then making matches based on a query? Are we talking about searching in an array within the like with the code itself? Or like what do you mean by search? Like what type of search are we talking about? Because there's tons of ways to implement a search. And all he said, I can't really say. Like, just tell me how do you implement search? Because I'm guessing that, and that's a classic one. They don't want to give me too much information so that I can sort of, they try to be restrictive with the information because that gives them a chance to evaluate whether or not I know anything, and that is not a bad idea. Like, you don't want to give people the answer to a question, but when it's, I would argue the question was so broad that I kind of just was grasping at straws. I said, well, I can implement search in an array in some way, and I can use something like Elastic or something like that. I would never recommend most companies to create their own search engine, for example. And let's just say the vibe really went south from there. And so the skills that you need to pass an interview is pretty much you simply need to be able to articulate your knowledge about software development. That's really what it comes down to, because you will get all kinds of questions. Like, some interviews are very specific questions where you get specific questions about tools, for example. That's why I recommend people to make sure that you know your tools and sort of roughly how they work and how you do certain things and mainstream ways of doing things. That's one thing that you will need to be able to do. Because when you sit, especially this is the style that I like to do, where I just sit down with you and we have a conversation about various technologies related to the specific role that we are interviewing for. And I'm not going to, as I like to say to people, I don't care if you work for 10, 20 years or just 1 year. I will ask you a bunch of questions at different levels. Like, some stuff is going to be like super, super beginner level stuff. And some stuff might be, well, I usually don't ask a lot of complicated questions, because the strategy I have is usually that I ask something that is like in an area. Like, for example, I will ask a backend developer about various polymorphism or composition over inheritance, like these sort of patterns of working that is very common in, say, object-oriented programming. And then if I hear that they really nail the basic answer, then I kind of extend it and I go a little bit harder with some harder, like I try to scale up instead of just taking arbitrary, super complicated questions about, I've had people who have been like pushing, especially in front end. That's one of my favorites, because I've always found that front end developers usually, they know their tools usually and like sort of what to use and stuff like that, but they don't really know how anything works. So if you go and start pushing people on, say, specifics about how Webpack works or how the event loop works or things like that in JavaScript, they usually always choke. And if they don't, then it's usually a person who has a lot of in-depth knowledge, and that's a good sign. But the main thing is, make sure that you know your tools well enough to at least explain various topics within the various ecosystems that you're going to work in. That's number one when you're dealing with like a personal interview. And then, of course, another one is like like understanding of systems and reasoning about how to build various types of software, which comes down to basically, all right, do you know, say, for example, the various cloud providers and what services are there and so forth. So that's also tool knowledge, or in this case, service knowledge, or like software as a service or platform as a service type of deals, right? Where you simply need to know what types of what the ecosystems that you're dealing with. And then it's a lot of experiences, like having done a bit of reflecting on like choices that you have made in technology, like you did one thing at one company and that worked out, or another company where it didn't work out, and like sort of reflecting a little bit. So a little bit of self-reflection is very good, but the main thing is really to be communicative enough and having the soft skills necessary in order to express clearly what you have been working with, what you know, and the things that, well, they might be asking about. So what I want you to take away from this is the skill set required to pass an interview is usually not the same. Well, it's not not necessarily. There are overlaps. I mean, because you can always argue that, for example, if I sit and have a conversation with some software developers and we're going to pitch ideas of what to do next to like an engineering manager, a product manager, or something like that, I usually get their ear quicker because I practice with these little videos and things like that to try to communicate clearly and efficiently when I express my thoughts, which, well, it's a universally useful skill if you are articulate and you know how to like move in a social context and speak so people will listen. That's going to help you in every aspect that requires other people, basically. And then of course it's technical knowledge and things like that. The one thing that is classic though is that there's the little discrepancy between what you do on the job and how the interview works when it comes to the actual code test. Usually I say there's a 50-50 chance that you will get either a die-hard computer science-y type of challenge where you use something like LeetCode or Caddis or these sort of platforms where they're more interested in like algorithms and data structure types of questions, and passing that can be a bit tougher for a lot of people than doing the actual work, depending on what you spend your time on, because we have quite a lot of university students who only focus on that stuff and then they don't take the time to learn like Git and like the various web frameworks or front-end frameworks or whatever, right? And that's the other type, which is more realistic, as I like to call them, coding tests, where it's a small application or something like that that you're going to build. In that scenario, it's basically a complete overlap between the skills that you have on the job and the interview itself, apart from the social aspects. But the computer science and algorithms things, these things are relevant, but it's not that common that you do that as much and to the same depth as you do in like competitive programming and so forth when you're doing something like web development as a profession or like as a job. So there is a little bit of discrepancy there, but if you want my personal advice on how to pass quote unquote every interview, number one, make sure that you know how to express your understanding of your various tools, so know your tools and how they work and things like that. And number two, make sure that you have a positive attitude towards technology and you show engagement. Try to, if you need to, I mean, do the thing that I do, create little weird videos where you practice your speech a little bit so that you can speak to strangers or people you don't know all that well in a way that feels comfortable for everybody involved. These two things, because it's almost always the same thing, showing that you know your tools and showing that you have social skills and so forth. Those two things are universally going to help you in every single interview. Have a great day.